in the scorching desert of Arizona, where the sun burns mercy from the sky and hope dies with the setting light, desperation can drive a mother to offer the unthinkable. But sometimes, in the darkest moments, humanity shines brightest from the most unexpected places. This is the true story of Maria Santos, a woman pushed to the edge of survival, and Joseph Crow Feather, an Apache elder who proved that compassion knows no boundaries of race, culture, or circumstance. The Dust Devil spun lazily across the cracked asphalt of Route 87, carrying with it the dreams that had died somewhere between Phoenix and nowhere. Maria Santos clutched the steering wheel of her battered 1998 Honda Civic with hands that trembled not from fear, but from the bone-deep exhaustion that comes when hope becomes a luxury you can no longer afford. In the back seat, 3-year-old Diego whimpered softly, his small voice barely audible above the rattling of the car's failing engine. "Mommy hungry," he whispered for the 100th time that day, his dark eyes reflecting a pain that no child should ever know. Maria's heart shattered a little more with each plea. She had nothing left to give him. The last of their food had been consumed 2 days ago, and the $23 in her wallet wouldn't even fill the gas tank halfway. She had been driving for hours, searching for something, anything that might offer them salvation, but the Arizona desert seemed determined to swallow them whole. The Honda coughed and wheezed as she pulled into the gravel parking lot of a small trading post that appeared to be the only sign of civilization for miles. The wooden sign above the entrance read Crow Feather Trading Post in faded letters that had been weathered by countless desert storms. Maria sat in the car for several minutes, gathering what remained of her courage. She had already sold everything of value, had already swallowed her pride in a dozen different ways, and now she was preparing to cross a line she had never imagined she would approach. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she lifted Diego from his car seat. His little body felt lighter than it should, and the realization sent another wave of desperation through her already fragmented composure. They had been living in their car for 3 weeks now, ever since the eviction notice had been served and her last job had ended with the restaurant's sudden closure. The shelters were full, the assistance programs had waiting lists that stretched for months, and her family back in Mexico might as well have been on another planet for all the help they could provide. The trading post was larger than it appeared from the outside, with high ceilings supported by rough-hewn beams and walls lined with handmade crafts, pottery, and jewelry that spoke of traditions stretching back generations. The air inside was blessedly cool, and Diego immediately perked up at the sight of colorful dream catchers hanging from the ceiling like gentle guardians. Behind the counter stood a man who appeared to be in his 60s, his weathered face marked by deep lines that spoke of years spent under the desert sun. His silver-streaked black hair was pulled back in a traditional braid, and his dark eyes held a depth that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. This was Joseph Crow Feather, though Maria didn't know his name yet. She only knew that he represented her last, desperate chance. "Can I help you?" Joseph asked, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who chose his words carefully. He had noticed the woman and child the moment they entered his store, had seen the desperate look in the mother's eyes and the hollow cheeks of the little boy who clung to her leg. Maria's throat felt like sandpaper as she tried to form words. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind a dozen times during the drive, but now that she was here facing this stranger, the words seemed impossible to speak. Diego tugged at her worn jeans, and the sound of his small stomach rumbling filled the silence. "Please," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "My son. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. I don't have money, but I can—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't bring herself to voice the offer that desperation had planted in her mind. Joseph's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He had run this trading post for over 30 years, had seen every kind of person pass through his doors, but there was something about this young mother that reached past his usual reserve. He could see the story written in the lines of her face, in the careful way she held herself, in the protective stance she maintained over her child. "When did you last eat?" he asked gently, directing the question to both mother and child. "Mommy not eat," Diego answered, before his mother could respond, his small voice carrying the innocent honesty that children possess. "Mommy, give me her food." The simple statement hit Joseph like a physical blow. He had raised 3 children of his own, had buried a wife who died too young, and had learned through decades of living that true character was revealed not in times of plenty, but in moments of absolute desperation. This woman had been starving herself to feed her child, and now even that sacrifice was no longer enough. Maria felt her cheeks burn with shame. She had tried so hard to hide their situation from Diego, to maintain some semblance of normalcy even as their world crumbled around them. Now this stranger knew the depth of their desperation, and she braced herself for the judgment she was certain would come. But Joseph surprised her. Instead of the disgust or dismissal she expected, his voice became even gentler. "What's your name?" "Maria," she whispered. "Maria Santos, and this is Diego." "Well, Maria Santos," Joseph said, moving around the counter with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who had learned that rushing rarely solved anything. "I'm Joseph Crowfeather, and this is my store. Now, I don't know what brought you to my door today, but I can see that you're carrying a heavy burden." He knelt down to Diego's eye level, his weathered face softening as he looked at the child. "What do you say we find you something to eat, young man?" "I think I might have some cookies hidden away somewhere." Diego looked up at his mother with wide, hopeful eyes, but Maria's guilt and desperation warred with her relief. "I can't pay," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I told you, I don't have money, but I can." Again, the words died in her throat. Joseph stood slowly, studying Maria's face, with eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize the signs of someone pushed beyond their breaking point. He had spent years learning to read people, to understand the stories they carried, and Maria's story was written in every line of exhaustion around her eyes, in every careful gesture she made to shield her son from their reality. "Come with me," he said finally, leading them toward the back of the store, where a small kitchen area was tucked behind a beaded curtain. "Both of you." The kitchen was simple but clean, with a small table and 2 chairs that looked handmade. Joseph moved with quiet efficiency, pulling ingredients from a well-stocked pantry and refrigerator. Within minutes, the smell of frying eggs and toasting bread filled the air, and Diego's eyes grew wide with wonder. "Sit," Joseph commanded gently, and Maria found herself sinking into one of the chairs, her legs finally giving out under the weight of exhaustion and overwhelming relief. Diego climbed into her lap, his small hands reaching toward the food that Joseph was preparing. "Mr. Crowfeather," Maria began, but he raised a weathered hand to stop her. "Just Joseph," he said, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and sliced apples in front of Diego. "And before you say anything else, let me tell you something about Apache tradition." He settled into the second chair, his movements careful and measured. "In our culture, hospitality is not just a courtesy, it's a sacred duty. When someone comes to your door in need, you don't turn them away. You don't ask questions about how they came to be in need, and you certainly don't ask for payment. You simply help, because that's what human beings do for each other." Diego had already begun eating, his small hands gripping the fork with the intensity of someone who had forgotten what food tasted like. Maria watched him with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the simple act of seeing her son fed. "But I have nothing to offer you," she whispered, the weight of her desperation still crushing her chest. "Nothing except—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the desperate offer that had brought her to this place. Joseph leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes studying her face with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Maria," he said quietly, "what exactly did you think you were going to offer me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Maria felt her face burn with shame as she realized what she had been prepared to do, what desperation had driven her to consider. She had been ready to sell the only thing she had left, to cross a line that could never be uncrossed, all for the chance to feed her hungry child. "I thought," she began, then stopped, unable to meet his eyes. "I thought maybe you might want company for the night, in exchange for food, for help." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Diego continued eating, oblivious to the adult conversation happening around him, his small face brightening with each bite. Joseph sat quietly, processing what Maria had just revealed, understanding now the full depth of her desperation and the courage it had taken for her to walk through his door. "Maria," he said finally, his voice carrying no judgment, only sadness for what desperation had driven her to consider. "Look at me." She raised her eyes reluctantly, expecting to see disgust or worse. Instead, she found only kindness and a deep well of understanding that she hadn't expected from a stranger. "You don't have to sell yourself to feed your child," he said simply. "Not here. Not ever. Do you understand me?" The words broke something inside her that had been holding her together through sheer force of will. The tears came then, great racking sobs that she tried to muffle against her hand so as not to frighten Diego. All the fear, all the shame, all the desperate calculations she had been making for weeks came pouring out in that small kitchen behind a trading post in the middle of nowhere. Joseph reached across the table and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You're safe here, both of you." When the storm of tears finally subsided, Maria found herself looking at this stranger who had shown her more kindness in one afternoon than she had received in months. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why are you helping us?" Joseph was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant, as if he were remembering something from long ago. "Because," he said finally, 35 years ago, I was where you are now. My wife had just died in childbirth, leaving me with 3 young children and no idea how to care for them. I was proud and stubborn and convinced I could handle everything alone." He paused, watching Diego finish the last of his eggs with the methodical concentration of someone who had learned not to waste a single bite. "I was wrong," he continued. "I was so wrong that I nearly lost everything that mattered. It was a woman named Sarah Mitchell who ran the diner in town, who saved us. She gave me work, fed my children when I couldn't, and never once made me feel like I was charity. She just helped. Because that's what people do." Maria listened, beginning to understand that this act of kindness wasn't random, wasn't even particularly about her. It was about continuing a cycle of compassion that had begun decades ago with another desperate parent and a stranger's kindness. "Sarah used to tell me that kindness is like a stone thrown into still water," Joseph said. "The ripples spread out in all directions, touching shores you never even knew existed. She died 10 years ago, but every time I help someone, I like to think those ripples are still spreading." Diego had finished eating and was now exploring the small kitchen, with the curiosity of a child who had finally had enough food to think about something other than hunger. He picked up a small carved wooden horse from a shelf, turning it over in his small hands with wonder. "That belonged to my youngest son," Joseph said, watching Diego examine the toy. "He's grown now, has children of his own, but he carved that horse when he was about Diego's age." "It's beautiful," Maria said, her voice still hoarse from crying. "All of this is beautiful. Your home, your kindness, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Joseph replied, "but I do need to ask you some questions, not because I'm judging you, but because I want to help you figure out what comes next." Maria nodded, finally beginning to believe that this stranger might actually be willing to help her without expecting anything in return. It was a concept so foreign to her recent experience that she almost couldn't accept it, but Diego's contented exploration of the kitchen provided all the proof she needed that this place was safe.
"How long have you been living in your car?" Joseph asked.
3 weeks, Maria answered honestly. "We were evicted from our apartment. I was working at a restaurant, but it closed suddenly. The owner said business was bad, and just like that, we had nothing." "And Diego's father?" Maria's face hardened slightly. "He left when Diego was 6 months old. Said he wasn't ready to be a father. I haven't heard from him since." Joseph nodded, filing away the information without comment. He had heard variations of this story countless times over the years, had learned that judgment served no purpose and changed nothing. "Family?" he asked. "In Mexico," Maria said. "My parents are farmers, barely making enough to survive themselves. They don't even know how bad things have gotten. I've been telling them everything is fine." "Pride," Joseph said with understanding. "I know that feeling well. But pride doesn't feed hungry children." "I know," Maria whispered. I thought I could figure it out. 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 But everything I tried led to another dead end. Joseph stood and refilled Diego's cup with milk, watching the little boy's face light up at the simple gesture. "What kind of work did you do before the restaurant?" "Anything I could find," Maria said. "Cleaning houses, working in shops, waitressing. I finished high school, but never had the chance to go to college. Diego came along, and I just focused on taking care of him." "You speak English well," Joseph observed. "I was born in Tucson," Maria explained. "My parents brought me here when I was 2. I grew up here, but when my parents were deported, I went with them. I came back when I found out I was pregnant, thinking there would be more opportunities for Diego here." The story was becoming clearer to Joseph, painting a picture of a young woman who had made the best decision she could with limited options, only to find herself trapped by circumstances beyond her control. It was a story he had heard before, would undoubtedly hear again, but that didn't make it any less heartbreaking. "Tell me about Diego," he said, settling back into his chair as the little boy continued his exploration. Maria's face softened immediately, the harsh lines of stress and worry melting away as she watched her son. "He's everything," she said simply. "Smart, funny, brave. He hasn't complained once about living in the car, hasn't cried about being hungry. He trusts that I'll take care of him, and that trust is killing me because I'm failing him." "No," Joseph said firmly. "You're not failing him. You're here, aren't you? You drove however many miles to this trading post, ready to do whatever it took to feed him. That's not failure, Maria. That's love." The words hit her like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they offered a perspective she hadn't been able to see through the fog of her desperation. She had been so focused on what she couldn't provide for Diego that she had lost sight of what she was providing: unwavering love, constant presence, and a mother's fierce determination to protect and care for her child. "What happens now?" she asked, the question carrying all the uncertainty of her future. Joseph was quiet for a long moment, watching Diego play with the wooden horse. When he spoke, his voice was measured and careful. "That depends on what you're willing to accept." Maria felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Joseph said, "that I have a proposition for you. Not what you were prepared to offer, nothing like that. A job." The word hung in the air between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Maria stared at him, afraid to hope, afraid to believe that salvation might actually be within reach. "I need help here at the trading post," Joseph continued. "Business has been growing, and I'm getting too old to handle everything alone. I need someone who can work with customers, help with inventory, maybe learn some of the traditional crafts to sell. The pay isn't much, but it comes with a small apartment above the store." Maria felt her heart stop. "You're offering me a job? A place to live? But you don't even know me. I could be lying about everything." "Could be," Joseph agreed. "But I don't think you are. I've been reading people for a long time, Maria Santos, and you're not a liar. You're desperate and you're frightened, but you're not dishonest. Besides, Diego here is all the character reference I need." As if summoned by his name, Diego wandered over to Joseph's chair, still clutching the wooden horse. Without hesitation, he climbed into the old man's lap, settling against his chest with the easy trust that children reserve for those who are truly safe. "You like horses?" Joseph asked, and Diego nodded enthusiastically. "I never seen a real horse," Diego said, his 3-year-old grammar charming in its imperfection. "Well," Joseph said, glancing at Maria, "if your mama says it's okay, maybe we can change that." Maria watched her son in this stranger's lap, saw the contentment on Diego's face that she hadn't seen in weeks, and felt something shift inside her chest.
For the first time in months, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that things might actually get better.
"Why would you do this?" she asked, still struggling to accept that such kindness existed without strings attached. Joseph shifted slightly, adjusting Diego's weight on his lap. As the little boy began to doze, finally relaxed and well-fed enough to rest. "Because," he said simply, "this is what we do. We help each other. We take care of the children. We make sure no one has to face the darkness alone." The words carried the weight of tradition, of a culture that had survived centuries of hardship by maintaining the bonds that held communities together. Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time: the possibility of belonging somewhere, of being part of something larger than her own struggle. "I don't know anything about running a trading post," she said, but there was hope in her voice now, tentative and fragile but unmistakably present. "I didn't know anything about it either when I started," Joseph replied. "My grandfather left me this place and I learned as I went. Besides, the most important part of this job isn't about merchandise or money. It's about understanding that everyone who walks through that door has a story, and sometimes they need someone to listen to that story." Maria looked around the small kitchen, at this place that had already given her more peace than she had known in months. She thought about the apartment upstairs, about the possibility of Diego having a real bed again, about the chance to rebuild their lives in a place where kindness was offered freely. "If I said yes," she began carefully, "what would you expect from me?" "Honesty," Joseph said immediately. "Hard work, and a willingness to learn not just about running a business, but about the people who come here. This trading post serves the reservation community, but we get all kinds of travelers too. People looking for something authentic, something real. Sometimes they're looking for souvenirs, but sometimes they're looking for connection, for understanding. He paused, looking down at Diego, who had fallen asleep in his lap with the complete trust of a child who finally felt safe. Most importantly, he continued, I would expect you to remember this feeling, this moment when a stranger offered you help when you needed it most. Someday you'll be in a position to help someone else, and I hope you'll remember what it felt like to receive that help. The circle of kindness, Maria realized. The stone thrown into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this small trading post in the Arizona desert. Yes, she said quietly, the word carrying the weight of a decision that would change everything. Yes, I would like that job. Joseph smiled. The first real smile Maria had seen from him since they arrived. It transformed his weathered face, revealing the warmth that had been there all along, hidden behind the careful reserve of someone who had learned to be cautious with his trust. Good, he said simply. Then let's get you and Diego settled upstairs, and tomorrow we'll start figuring out how all of this is going to work. As the sun began to set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed to promise better days ahead, Maria Santos realized that sometimes salvation comes not in the form you expect, but in exactly the form you need. She had walked into this trading post prepared to sacrifice everything for her son's survival, and instead had found something she had never dared to hope for. A second chance. Offered freely by a stranger who understood that kindness was not a transaction, but a way of life. The wooden horse lay forgotten on the table as Diego slept peacefully in Joseph's arms, finally free from the hunger that had been his constant companion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adjustments, and the hard work of rebuilding their lives. But for the first time in months, Maria Santos went to sleep that night, knowing that her son would wake up fed, safe, and home. The morning sun streamed through the small window of the apartment above the trading post, and for the first time in weeks, Maria woke up not to the cramped confines of her car, but to the sound of Diego's laughter. The little boy was sitting on the floor, playing with the wooden horse Joseph had given him the night before, making soft galloping sounds as he moved the toy across the worn wooden planks. The apartment was simple but clean, furnished with the basics: a small bed that she and Diego had shared, a tiny kitchenette, and a sitting area with a window that looked out over the vast expanse of desert. It wasn't much by most standards, but to Maria, it felt like a palace. More importantly, it felt safe. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Maria, are you and Diego awake? Joseph's voice carried the same patient kindness it had held the evening before, and Maria felt a flutter of nervousness. In the clear light of morning, she found herself questioning whether the events of the previous day had really happened, whether this Apache elder had truly offered them not just help, but a new life. Yes, we're up, she called, quickly running her fingers through her hair and smoothing Diego's rumpled clothes. When she opened the door, she found Joseph standing in the hallway with a breakfast tray. I thought you might be hungry, he said simply. And Maria felt tears threaten again. Even now, even after everything he had already done, he was still thinking of their needs. You don't have to keep feeding us, she protested. But Joseph was already setting the tray on the small table by the window. Actually, I do, he said with a slight smile. It's part of your employment package, meals included. The casual way he said it, as if her employment was already settled fact, helped ease some of Maria's lingering anxiety. Diego immediately climbed into one of the chairs, his eyes lighting up at the sight of scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. Thank you for the horse, Diego said to Joseph, holding up the carved toy. He's my friend now. I'm glad you like him, Joseph replied, settling into the other chair as Maria poured coffee from the pot he had brought. What's his name? Diego considered this seriously, his small face scrunched in concentration. Thunder, he announced finally, because horses are loud when they run. Joseph chuckled, and Maria found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. There was something magical about watching her son interact with this gentle man, something that reminded her of what normal childhood interactions should look like. Thunder is a good name for a horse, Joseph agreed. Very traditional. Apache warriors often named their horses for the sounds they made or the way they moved. As they ate breakfast, Joseph began explaining what working at the trading post would entail. The store opened at 8 each morning and closed at 6 in the evening, 7 days a week during tourist season. Maria would help customers learn about the various crafts and their origins so she could explain them to visitors and gradually take over some of the administrative tasks that Joseph had been handling alone. The most important thing, Joseph explained, is understanding that people don't just come here to buy things. They come here looking for something authentic, something that connects them to the culture and history of this place. Your job is to help them find that connection. Maria nodded, trying to absorb everything he was telling her. It seemed overwhelming, but also exciting in a way that she hadn't felt in years. The restaurant work she had been doing was just about survival, but this felt like it might actually be meaningful. "What about Diego?" she asked, the practical mother in her immediately concerned about childcare. "What about him?" Joseph replied. "This is his home now too. There's a playpen behind the counter where he can stay while you're working, and plenty of safe spaces for him to explore. Some of our regular customers have been bringing their children here for years. Diego will fit right in." The casual acceptance in Joseph's voice almost undid Maria again. She had spent so much energy over the past months worrying about being judged as an inadequate mother, about having to choose between caring for her son and earning money to support him. The idea that she could do both, in the same place, with the support of someone who understood, felt almost too good to be true. After breakfast, Joseph gave them a proper tour of the trading post. The main floor was larger than Maria had realized the day before, filled with an incredible array of handmade goods. There were pottery pieces in rich earth tones, jewelry crafted from silver and turquoise, woven baskets in intricate patterns, and paintings that captured the stark beauty of the desert landscape. "Most of these are made by local artists," Joseph explained, running his hand along a particularly beautiful dream catcher. "We have relationships with artisans throughout the reservation. They bring me their work, I display it and sell it, and we split the profits." It's been working this way for decades. Maria examined a delicate silver bracelet, marveling at the intricate detail of the metalwork. "How do you know so much about all of this?" "Time," Joseph said simply. "And teachers. My grandfather started this trading post in 1952. He taught me about the traditional crafts, about the stories behind the patterns and symbols. My wife was a weaver, probably the best in the county. She taught me about textiles, about the different techniques and materials." There was a sadness in his voice when he mentioned his wife, but also a deep love that had clearly survived her passing. Maria found herself curious about this man's story, about what had shaped him into someone capable of such extraordinary kindness. "She died 15 years ago," Joseph continued, as if reading her thoughts. "Cancer. We knew it was coming, had time to prepare, but you never really prepare for something like that. The kids helped me keep this place running those first few years, but they have their own lives now. It's been just me for a long time." The admission explained so much about the loneliness Maria had sensed beneath Joseph's calm exterior. He wasn't just helping them out of abstract kindness, he was also helping himself, creating connection in a life that had become too solitary. Diego had discovered a collection of small carved animals on a low shelf and was examining each one with the intense concentration of a 3-year-old. "Can I play with these?" he asked. "Those are for sale," Joseph explained gently. "But I think we can find you some other toys to play with." He led them to a storage room where he pulled out a box of simple wooden toys, obviously well loved from years of use by other children. "These belonged to my kids when they were small. I kept them thinking maybe grandchildren would want them someday, but my kids live in different states now. I think Thunder here would like some friends." The generosity of the gesture wasn't lost on Maria. Joseph was not only giving Diego toys to play with, but also sharing pieces of his own family history, creating a sense of belonging that went beyond mere employment. The first customer arrived shortly after the store officially opened, an elderly tourist couple from Michigan looking for authentic Southwestern jewelry. Maria watched from behind the counter as Joseph interacted with them, noting how he took time to explain the significance of different symbols and techniques, how he made the shopping experience educational rather than purely transactional. "The turquoise in this piece comes from the Sleeping Beauty mine," he explained, showing them a pendant. "It's been mined by Native Americans for over 1,000 years. The silver work is traditional Navajo style, using techniques passed down through generations." The couple left with not just a piece of jewelry, but also a deeper appreciation for the culture it represented. Maria began to understand what Joseph meant about helping people find connection. As the morning progressed, more customers came and went. Maria stayed mostly in the background, observing and learning, while Diego played contentedly with his new toys. She noticed how Joseph remembered details about returning customers, how he asked about their families or their previous purchases. This wasn't just a business to him, it was a community gathering place. Around noon, a young Apache woman entered the store carrying a canvas bag. She was perhaps Maria's age, with long black hair braided with turquoise beads and wearing a traditional ribbon shirt. Her eyes immediately found Joseph, and Maria saw them exchange a warm greeting in what she assumed was Apache. "Maria, I'd like you to meet Sarah Yazzie," Joseph said, switching to English. "She's one of our regular artists." "Sarah, this is Maria Santos and her son Diego. Maria's going to be helping me run the store." Sarah studied Maria with intelligent dark eyes, and Maria felt suddenly self-conscious. This woman was clearly part of Joseph's extended community, and Maria wondered if her presence as an outsider might be unwelcome. But Sarah's smile was genuine as she extended her hand. "It's nice to meet you, Maria." Joseph mentioned he was thinking about getting help. "You mentioned me?" Maria asked, surprised. Joseph looked slightly embarrassed. "I may have been considering the possibility of hiring someone for a while now. I'm not getting any younger." Sarah laughed, a musical sound that filled the store with warmth. "He's been saying that for 5 years, but he's too stubborn to actually do anything about it. What finally changed your mind?" Joseph glanced at Diego, who was now arranging his wooden animals in elaborate parades across the floor. "Sometimes the universe makes decisions for you." Sarah nodded as if this made perfect sense, then turned her attention to her canvas bag. "I brought the new batch of pottery," she said, carefully unwrapping pieces that took Maria's breath away. The pottery was unlike anything Maria had seen before. Each piece seemed to capture the essence of the desert, with colors that shifted from deep earth tones to bright sky blues, patterns that seemed to flow like water across the clay surfaces. "These are incredible," Maria breathed, reaching out to touch one of the pieces before catching herself. "Go ahead," Sarah encouraged. "They're meant to be touched. The clay wants to be handled." Maria carefully lifted a small bowl, marveling at its surprising lightness and the way it seemed to warm under her fingers. "How do you create these colors?" "Traditional techniques," Sarah explained, clearly pleased by Maria's interest. "The clay comes from specific sites on the reservation, places that have been used by potters for hundreds of years. The colors come from local minerals, plants, and firing techniques that my grandmother taught me." As Sarah and Joseph discussed business, arranging her pieces throughout the store and talking about pricing, Maria found herself fascinated by the casual way they conducted their relationship. There was clearly deep mutual respect, but also an easy familiarity that spoke of years of working together. "How long have you been making pottery?" Maria asked when there was a lull in their conversation. "Since I was Diego's age," Sarah replied, smiling at the little boy who had abandoned his toys to listen to the adults talk. "My grandmother started teaching me as soon as I could hold clay without squishing it into nothing." "It must be wonderful to have that connection to your family history," Maria said, and immediately worried that she had revealed too much about her own sense of displacement. But Sarah's expression was understanding rather than judgmental. "Traditional skills are important, but they're not the only way to connect with culture. Sometimes the most important thing is just being open to learning, being willing to listen to the stories." The comment felt directed at Maria, and she realized that Sarah was offering her own form of welcome, acknowledging that Maria might not have traditional connections but suggesting that she could still find ways to belong. As the afternoon wore on, Maria began to feel more confident about interacting with customers. Joseph encouraged her to ask questions, to admit when she didn't know something, and to focus on learning rather than trying to appear knowledgeable about things she was still discovering. One customer, a middle-aged man from California, was looking for a gift for his wife who collected Native American art. Maria found herself able to explain the differences between pottery styles from different tribes, information she had absorbed just from listening to Joseph and Sarah's earlier conversation. "The techniques are passed down through families," she explained, echoing what she had heard. "Each piece is unique because it's made by hand, using methods that are hundreds of years old." The man seemed impressed by her knowledge, and when he left with a purchase, Joseph nodded approvingly. "You're a natural at this," he said. "I'm just repeating what I heard you and Sarah talking about," Maria protested. But she felt a flush of pride at his compliment. "That's exactly what you should be doing," Joseph replied. "Learning by listening, then sharing what you've learned. That's how knowledge gets passed along." As closing time approached, Maria realized that the day had passed more quickly and pleasantly than any day she could remember in months. Diego had been content to play in his designated area, occasionally charming customers with his shy smiles and earnest questions about the pretty things in the store. "How did I do?" she asked as Joseph locked the front door and turned the sign to closed. "Better than I expected," he said honestly. "You have good instincts for reading people, for understanding what they're looking for. That's the most important skill in this business." As they climbed the stairs to the apartment, Diego already drooping with exhaustion despite his afternoon nap, Maria felt a contentment she had almost forgotten was possible. The day had been productive, educational, and most importantly, normal in a way that their lives hadn't been for months. "Joseph," she said as he prepared to leave them for the evening, "I need you to know how grateful I am, not just for the job, but for the way you're treating us, like we belong here." Joseph paused in the doorway, his weathered face thoughtful. "Maria, can I tell you something about Apache philosophy?" She nodded, settling Diego on her hip as he fought sleep. "We believe that every person who comes into your life does so for a reason," he said. "Sometimes they come to teach you something, sometimes they come to learn something from you, and sometimes they come because you're both supposed to help each other grow." He gestured around the small apartment, then down toward the trading post below. "I've been alone here for a long time, telling myself I was fine, that I didn't need help or company. But the truth is, this place was meant to have families in it, to have children's laughter echoing through the rooms. You and Diego aren't just helping me with the business. You're helping me remember what it feels like to have purpose beyond just surviving." The admission was clearly difficult for him, and Maria felt the weight of trust he was placing in her by sharing his vulnerability. "I promise you," she said quietly, "we won't let you down." "I know you won't," Joseph replied. "But more than that, I hope you'll let this place heal you the way it's already starting to heal me." After he left, Maria sat in a small sitting area with Diego finally asleep in her arms, looking out the window at the desert landscape painted silver by moonlight. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't planning their next move, wasn't calculating how many meals they could afford or where they might find shelter for the following night. Instead, she was thinking about pottery techniques and customer service, about the stories behind the crafts in the store below, about how she might learn enough to truly deserve Joseph's trust. She was thinking, she realized with some surprise, about the future, in terms of possibilities, rather than just survival. The wooden horse Diego had been playing with sat on the windowsill, its carved features softened by the moonlight. It occurred to Maria that the toy was more than just a gift for her son. It was a symbol of the stability they had found here, of the childlike wonder that Diego was finally free to express without the shadow of hunger and uncertainty. As she carried her sleeping son to their shared bed, Maria found herself thinking about Sarah Yazzi's pottery, about the connection between the artist's hands and clay that had been shaped by countless generations before her. There was something profound about that continuity, about traditions that survived and thrived through individual dedication to craft and community. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new customers, new opportunities to learn and grow. But tonight, for the first time in months, Maria Santos fell asleep not in fear of what morning might bring, but in anticipation of it. She was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to build a life. The desert wind whispered through the small apartment, carrying with it the promise of change, the possibility of belonging, and the ancient wisdom that sometimes salvation comes not in the form we expect, but in exactly the form we need. In saving Maria and Diego, Joseph Crowfeather was also saving himself, creating the family connection he hadn't realized he was missing. And in the morning, the work of building that connection would continue. One shared meal, one learned skill, one act of kindness at a time. 6 months had passed since Maria Santos first walked through the doors of the Crowfeather trading post, desperate and ready to sacrifice everything for her son's survival. Now, as she arranged a new display of Sarah Yazzi's pottery in the morning light, she could hardly recognize the woman she had been that day. The hollow cheeks and desperate eyes had been replaced by healthy color and quiet confidence. More importantly, the fear that had consumed her every waking moment had transformed into something she had never expected to feel again. Hope for the future. Diego, now almost 4 years old, had blossomed in ways that constantly amazed his mother. The shy, hungry child who had clung to her legs in desperation had become a chatty, curious boy who greeted regular customers by name and could explain to visitors that the dream catchers were made by Mr. Joseph's friend Emma and that they were supposed to catch bad dreams. His favorite spot in the store was still the corner where his collection of wooden animals had grown to include not just Thunder the horse, but an entire menagerie carved by Joseph during quiet evening hours. "Mama, look!" Diego called from his play area, holding up a drawing he had made with the crayons Sarah had brought him. "It's you and me and Grandpa Joseph at the horse place." Maria's heart swelled at Diego's casual use of Grandpa Joseph, a title that had evolved naturally over the months, and which Joseph wore with obvious pride. The drawing depicted 3 stick figures standing next to something that might generously be interpreted as a horse, rendered in the bold, confident strokes of early childhood artistry. "That's beautiful, mijo," Maria said, hanging the drawing on the bulletin board where Joseph displayed Diego's artistic efforts alongside announcements for local events and photographs of satisfied customers with their purchases. The morning routine had become as comfortable as breathing. Joseph would arrive at 7:30 with coffee and pastries from the reservation bakery. They would review the day's expected deliveries and special orders, and Maria would prepare the store for opening, while Joseph and Diego discussed important matters like whether Thunder needed a friend, or if the carved eagle on the high shelf looked lonely. "We're expecting a busload of tourists around 10, Joseph announced, consulting the reservation book where Maria now recorded their scheduled group visits. "Retirees from Phoenix, interested in traditional crafts and local history." Maria nodded, mentally reviewing the talking points she had mastered over the months. She could now explain the significance of different pottery patterns, the spiritual meaning of various jewelry symbols, and the historical context of the artwork they displayed. More than just memorizing facts, she had begun to understand the deeper connections between the crafts and the culture they represented. "Sarah's bringing more pieces this afternoon," Maria added. She mentioned she's been experimenting with a new firing technique her great-grandmother used. The easy exchange of information reflected how seamlessly Maria had integrated into the trading post's operation. She handled most customer interactions now, managed inventory and ordering, and had even begun learning some basic bookkeeping. Joseph still oversaw the major decisions, but increasingly he trusted her judgment and relied on her insights about what customers were seeking. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. There had been difficult days when Maria's old insecurity surfaced, when she doubted her ability to learn and contribute meaningfully. There had been nights when the weight of Joseph's kindness felt overwhelming, when she worried that she could never repay what she owed him. But gradually, through daily acts of trust and encouragement, both she and Joseph had learned to see their relationship not as creditor and debtor, but as partners building something valuable together. The busload of tourists arrived precisely at 10, and Maria watched with satisfaction as she guided them through the store, explaining the origins and techniques behind various pieces. Her confidence in these interactions had grown enormously, fueled by genuine passion for what she was sharing rather than mere memorized information. "This pottery style has been used by the local tribes for over 800 years, she explained to a fascinated elderly woman who was examining one of Sarah's bowls. "The clay comes from specific sites that have been sacred to potters for generations, and each piece is fired using techniques passed down through families."
"How do you know so much about this?"
the woman asked, clearly impressed. "I've been learning from the artists themselves," Maria replied, and the pride in her voice was unmistakable. "Working here has been like getting an education in living culture." After the tour group left, several members having made purchases, Joseph appeared at Maria's side, with an expression she had learned to recognize. It was the look he wore when he was preparing to broach a subject he considered important. "Maria, can we talk for a few minutes?" he asked. They settled at the small table in the back kitchen area, where they often conducted their more serious conversations. Diego was absorbed in arranging his animal figures in elaborate scenes, providing them with the privacy adults sometimes needed. "You've been here 6 months now," Joseph began, and Maria felt her stomach tighten with sudden anxiety. Was this the conversation where he told her the arrangement had run its course? "You've exceeded every expectation I had," he continued, and Maria's relief was palpable. "You've learned faster than I thought possible. You connect with customers in ways that genuinely surprise me, and you've brought life back to this place in ways I didn't even realize it was missing." "Thank you," Maria said quietly, still uncertain where this conversation was heading. "Which is why I want to make you a formal partner in the business," Joseph said, the words causing Maria to stare at him in stunned silence. "A partner?" she finally managed. 30% ownership, Joseph clarified, with full decision-making authority in daily operations and equal say in major business decisions. "I've had the paperwork drawn up by my lawyer." Maria felt dizzy with the magnitude of what he was offering. "Joseph, I can't accept that. I haven't contributed anything like 30% of what this place is worth." "Haven't you?" Joseph asked gently. "Maria, when you walked in here 6 months ago, I was a lonely old man going through the motions of running a business I'd lost passion for. I was operating out of habit rather than purpose, and it showed in everything from customer interactions to the way I displayed merchandise." He gestured around the kitchen, then toward the store beyond. "Look at this place now. Look at how it feels when customers walk in. You've brought energy and enthusiasm that I'd forgotten how to generate. You've brought Diego's laughter and curiosity. You've brought your own fresh perspective on how to connect with people." Maria was quiet, trying to process the enormity of what he was proposing. "More than that," Joseph continued, "you've given me back a sense of family, of purpose beyond just keeping the doors open. This place was always meant to be more than a business. It was meant to be a bridge between cultures, a place where traditions could be shared and preserved. You've helped me remember that. But the legal aspects, the financial investment, have been handled. Joseph interrupted. I've restructured the business to reflect what you've contributed, and what I hope you'll continue to contribute. The lawyer says everything is perfectly legal and fair. Diego chose that moment to wander over, climbing into Maria's lap with the casual confidence of a child who had never doubted his welcome. Mama, are we staying here forever? He asked with the directness that only children possess. The question hung in the air, encompassing not just the immediate conversation but all the hopes and fears that had been building in Maria's heart over the months. She looked around the kitchen that had become their refuge, thought about the apartment upstairs that had become their first real home, considered the community of artists and customers that had become their extended family. What do you think? She asked Diego. Do you want to stay here?
Yes, Diego said immediately.
I want to stay with Grandpa Joseph and Thunder and all the pretty things. And Sarah promised to teach me to make pots when I'm bigger. Joseph chuckled at the boy's enthusiasm, but his eyes were on Maria, waiting for her answer to the question that would shape all their futures. I accept, Maria said quietly, the words carrying the weight of absolute commitment. But not just the business partnership. I accept this whole life, this whole community, this whole way of being in the world. Welcome home, he said simply. The afternoon brought Sarah Yazzie with her new pottery pieces, and when Joseph shared the news of their new partnership arrangement, Sarah's response was immediate and heartfelt. It's about time, she said, embracing Maria with genuine warmth. We've all been waiting for Joseph to make this official. You belong here, Maria. You and Diego both. The word belong still had the power to move Maria to tears. For so much of her life, she had felt like an outsider, never quite fitting into any community or situation completely. Here, among the desert landscapes and traditional crafts and generous hearts of people like Joseph and Sarah, she had found something she had never thought possible, a place where she was not just accepted but truly valued. As the weeks turned into months, Maria settled into her new role as co-owner with growing confidence. She initiated new marketing efforts that brought more customers to the store, developed relationships with additional artists to expand their inventory, and even began learning some basic craft techniques herself. Sarah had indeed begun teaching her pottery, and Maria discovered she had natural aptitude for working with clay. Her pieces were simple compared to Sarah's masterworks, but they sold well to customers who appreciated their honest, unpretentious beauty. You have good hands for this, Sarah said, one afternoon as Maria worked on a small bowl, her fingers learning to feel the clay's responsiveness. And, more importantly, you understand that pottery is about more than just making containers. It's about connecting with something ancient and continuous. Diego, now 4.5, had also begun his own artistic education. Sarah had given him child-safe clay to work with, and his enthusiastic creations, often featuring horses and other animals, were displayed alongside Maria's work in a special section of the store dedicated to emerging artists.
But perhaps the most significant change was in Joseph himself.
The lonely, isolated man who had been mechanically maintaining his trading post had been replaced by someone who approached each day with renewed energy and purpose. He and Diego had developed a special relationship that enriched both their lives, with Joseph teaching the boy traditional Apache words and stories, while Diego reminded him of the wonder and possibility inherent in childhood. One evening, as they sat outside the trading post watching the sunset paint the desert in spectacular colors, Joseph shared more of his story than he ever had before. When my wife died, he said, his voice quiet but steady, I thought my life was essentially over. Oh, I knew I'd keep going through the motions, keep the store running, but I didn't expect to find joy or purpose again. I certainly didn't expect to find family. Diego was playing with Thunder and his other wooden animals in the dirt nearby, creating elaborate adventures and providing a soundtrack of sound effects that made the adults smile. But that's what you two have given me, Joseph continued. Family. Not the family I was born into or the family I created through marriage, but the family that chose me and that I chose in return. Maria reached over and squeezed his weathered hand. We're the ones who were saved, Joseph. You gave us everything when we had nothing. No, Joseph said firmly. We saved each other. That's how real families work, Maria. Everyone contributes what they can, everyone receives what they need, and somehow the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. As if to illustrate his point, Diego wandered over and climbed onto Joseph's lap, leaning against the old man's chest with complete trust and affection. Grandpa Joseph, tell me about the horse spirits, he requested, referring to one of the traditional stories that had become part of their evening routine.
Once upon a time, Joseph began,
his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of traditional storytelling.
The horse spirits lived in the mountains, waiting for the people who would understand their medicine. Maria listened to the familiar story, watching her son's face light up with wonder at tales of wisdom and magic, and felt a contentment so complete it seemed almost impossible that their lives had once been dominated by desperation and fear. The trading post had become more than just a place of business. It had become a cultural center where traditional artists could share their work, where visitors could learn about authentic Native American culture, and where a small family had formed from the most unlikely circumstances. Word of their success had spread throughout the reservation and beyond. Other tribal communities had begun reaching out about featuring their artists' work. Tourism boards were including them in official visitor guides, and several universities had contacted them about educational partnerships. But for Maria, the most meaningful measure of their success wasn't found in sales figures or professional recognition. It was found in moments like this. One sitting in the gathering twilight with people she loved, watching her son grow up surrounded by beauty and tradition and unconditional acceptance.
"Mama," Diego said when Joseph finished the story, "are we rich now?"
The question surprised both adults. "What makes you ask that, Mijo?" Maria wondered. "Because we have everything," Diego explained with the simple wisdom of childhood. "We have our house and good food and pretty things and people who love us. That's what rich means, right?" Maria met Joseph's eyes across Diego's head, and they shared a moment of perfect understanding. The child had somehow managed to articulate what they had both been feeling but hadn't quite been able to express. "Yes," Maria said, pulling her son close and including Joseph in the embrace. "We are very, very rich." As the stars began to appear in the vast desert sky, three people who had found each other against all odds sat together in comfortable silence, each grateful for the mysterious forces that had brought them together. Maria thought about the desperate woman who had walked into this trading post less than a year ago, prepared to sacrifice everything for her son's survival, and marveled at how completely their lives had been transformed. The Apache say that every person who enters your life does so for a reason, and Maria now understood that her reason for finding Joseph wasn't just survival, it was to help him remember what family felt like, while he helped her discover what belonging really meant. The wooden horse sat on the porch beside them, weathered by months of play but still sturdy, still beautiful in its simple craftsmanship. Like their family, it had been carved by patient hands, shaped by time and care, and made strong through the love that had created it. In the morning, there would be customers to serve, artists to support, traditions to preserve and share. There would be the daily work of building something meaningful from the intersection of commerce and culture, of creating connections between people from different worlds. But tonight, there was just this. A woman who had learned that asking for help could lead to finding home. A man who had discovered that opening your heart to strangers could heal old wounds. And a child who had never doubted that love would provide everything they needed. Thunder the wooden horse seemed to smile in the starlight, as if he too understood that some stories of salvation come not from grand gestures or miraculous interventions, but from the simple, profound act of human beings choosing to care for one another. The ripples that had begun with Sarah Mitchell's kindness to Joseph decades earlier had spread across time and circumstance, touching shores that none of them could have imagined, proving that compassion truly is like a stone thrown into still water, its effects extending far beyond what the eye can see, creating waves of connection and hope that continue long after the initial act of kindness has been forgotten by everyone except those whose lives it changed forever. "Take me for a night, my son is hungry," she pleaded. The Apache said, "Stay, I'll feed you both."